Hi friends, welcome to episode 73. This is the first weekend of May and we've got a bank holiday on Monday, so it's 3 days up here working on the RT. So hopefully I'll get a bit done this week. So we did it. We actually managed to get the RT started up and I'm really quite pleased. After all those setbacks with the injectors and the fuel pump and all the other bits and pieces that gone on with it, I'm really pleased that we've now, I think, got there as far as the engine's concerned. Now, my friend Frank, who was a former engineer at Muswell Hill Bus Garage, who worked on RTs and RFs, is hopefully going to come up here tomorrow and help me do the tappets, because it's a little bit tappety, and it's a good time to do it before we put the rocker covers back on. So that would conclude that area of the bus. Then I need to put all the panels back on. That includes the bonnet, the wing, and all the other bits and pieces that go around the engine. So that will close up access to where the engine is at the moment. And then we can get on with this side of the bus. So that's going to be the summer project, I think. Anyway, as I always say with these things, let's see how we get on this weekend.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad weekend actually, but unfortunately it got a bit nippy. It was really lovely at the end of April showers they called it, but it was almost like an Indian summer. It was absolutely beautiful, and then it got a bit cold. Oh well, never mind, which is why I was wearing my coat when I did the intro. But anyway, let's kick off with episode 73. Right, I'm going to kick off with the most interesting subject over this 3-day extended weekend. Anyway, you may be aware that many years ago I took the offside of the bus out and I retimbered it and put all the panels back on. But the skirt panels I left off. And the reason for that is so that I could gain access to underneath the bus. Now, poking around under there, I discovered this. A bit of conduit that had rotted to excess. And this is a conduit that carries the main wires from the front of the bus to the back of the bus, or to the batteries and things. And clearly it couldn't be ignored. So I decided I'm going to have a little tinker with that. So in this picture, what you can see is the conduit, the bad bit cut off. The two bits of wire inside also cut off, and they're being replaced, and these are the replacements laying on the floor. So when I start the RT up now, these are the cables that I'm using. The batteries are actually outside the bus fairly uniquely, so I bought some conduit to fit this wire in and to replace the stuff that rotted, and a colleague of mine has welded it up at work, although I ran into a little bit of a problem trying to fit the thing back in, but we'll leave that for another day. There was this rather manky rotted bracket which I needed to sort out, and that holds the conduit up underneath the bus where it passes through the back of the bus, through the floor basically, and then up over the wheel arch. This thing holds it in place, and I needed to alter it slightly for the new conduit. So out comes the angle grinder and lots of sparks start to fly. Yeah, but unfortunately it's sod's law that this wasn't going to work out quite as planned. I did manage to alter the bracket to how I wanted it, but it's got to go back to work sadly for it to be welded on to the conduit that came out, and I need to make some further modifications to that. So I really did want to get the offside of the bus back in, because it's a nice little project. I can say that one's whipped out the way. However, as a result of starting up the bus and messing around with it, we've now discovered we've got an air problem. And guess where the air tanks are? Yep, you guessed it, on the offside of the bus. And thankfully the panels are not there, so we're probably going to have to do a little bit more work on the offside. And I wasn't looking forward to doing that. I really wanted to get this thing back together again. But that's the joys of owning an RT, folks. Right, these are the stress panels, or cant rail panels, to give them their correct title. Many RTs will have this problem. If you haven't taken the panels off an RT and had a poke around, you can get at these panels from removing the outside panels where the little white band or cream band goes, in this case the white band, or taking the saloon ceiling down. Part of that would also reveal them. Unfortunately, they have extensive rot problems. Now, there's a bit of a debate. Someone I know who's restoring his RT says don't bother with them, they are not really important. They are labelled on the London Transport drawings as stress panels, so therefore in my view they're an essential part of the bus. And what they do is they provide additional support for the upper deck floor, and they transfer, I assume, some of the stresses from the upper deck floor down onto that little piece of wood there, and also onto these little sort of feet things where the two parts of the bus were joined. Right, so the one I'm working on in this video is Bay 3, and this was the worst. I mean, about, I don't know, 50% of it has rotted out. And you could argue, if you use other people's argument, that given the fact that it's been like it for decades and the floor hasn't moved, why bother with them? You might as well take them out completely. Yep, and we've had that debate, haven't we, just now? So, but as you know, I'm going to take the whole lot out from the back there, right the way to the front of the bus. Now, I've got, as you're aware from a previous episode, I've asked someone to fabricate some panels for me to replace them. I'm not going to follow the original pattern, i.e. Them going underneath those feet, because that's going to be far too much effort, because I'm going to have to jack the bus up, the upper deck off the lower deck, and that is not something I want to do at this stage, because it seems like an incredible faff. So I'm not going to bother with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bracket it onto those feet, so that I think the stresses will still be transferred into the right places. I don't think it's going to do a great, I don't think it's going to give it any significant problems in the future, but at least I'm doing it, and that's a little job, I think, for the future. When they turn up, I'll spray them up and then I'll fit them in. But it is holding me up for that roof as well, because I can't put the roof in as it stands at the moment until we get the stress panels done. Right, let me introduce you to my long-term friend, Frank Strater. Frank worked for London Transport as an engineer, pre-privatisation, and he then subsequently moved, when the business was privatised, to Metroline. Frank's got extensive knowledge of buses from the RTs right up to the modern day. He's retired now, but he very kindly agreed to come up the barn on Sunday and to assist me with a couple of problems. The main thing was to set up the tappets before we put the rocker box cover back in. I thought it'd be logical that we do that. The other thing is, what on earth is going on with the air system, and finally to put the throttle linkage back in. So a free little job. So after a quick visit up to the cafe up the road, we got started. Let's kick off first with the air system. You might recall, if you watched last week's edition, that we had a little bit of a problem with the air building up, and this is a picture taken by Mark Davis, kindly sent over to me, and that is the gauge when the engine was running at probably half revs. As you can see, it's just sitting quite comfortably on 0, and we needed to understand why it wasn't building up. So the first thing we started to do was to check out all the pipes to see if we can find an obvious leak, and we couldn't. So the engine running was very difficult to perceive. The biggest problem with RTs not building up air is often the gearbox. So I was kind of prepared for that, and I had a spare gearbox seal ready to put into the gearbox. We found out it was the gearbox seal that played up. But the gearbox might well come into this story in a few minutes. Right, this is the gearbox reservoir, and at the end you've got a little silencer unit. That's that thing that looks like a sugar pot thing, sideways on, or a pepper pot, whatever you want to call it. But just behind it is the diverter valve, and just underneath you'll notice there's 3 bolts along the bottom there, and they are for draining out water. So the first thing we thought we would do is we'd check it and see if there was any water in the tank. So we removed the 3 bolts from the bottom, and this one merrily dripping away. So Frank decided we'll give the bus a quick start up and we'll see if we can blow some of that water away. I was in for a bit of a shock.
Oh, whoa!
Yeah, that's a lot of water in an air tank. Right, let's do a very quick run through, at least I hope it's going to be quick, of how the air system on an RT works. Within that tank, there's 3 bolts at the bottom. That's because there's 3 compartments within the tank. Route Masters don't have that, just have a singular tank, but RTs have 3. One is for the brakes. The other one is for the gearbox or the operating pedal, and then the final one, the third one, is an auxiliary tank or a reservoir, whatever you want to call it, so that when the other 2 start to become depleted, air moves back from the reservoir into the other 2 tanks. That's how it should work, and it's all regulated by the diverter valve, which is on the outside of the tank. Now, this comes as a bit of a surprise to me because we couldn't get any air into the brakes whatsoever. And the very first thing that happens is that air moves into the brake system in that first chamber. And then once that's charged up, it then starts to charge up for the gearbox. And then once that's charged up to the auxiliary tank. And then when that gets absolutely full, at about 105 PSI, says here in the manual, the bus will then start to unload to atmosphere. So that's the maximum. Now, at approximately, I'll have a look here, 50 to 60 PSI, the flag should raise. And you'll notice in this shot, the actual gauge is showing at around 80 PSI. Now, at that point, you should have both the flag up and the brakes operable and the gearbox and all the rest of it working. Wasn't going to happen quite like that. Right, so this is what actually happened. I'm in the edge of the bus trying to film into the cab, so apologies for the poor quality of this filming here. And I'm keeping an eye on the flag unit. That's the flag unit up there. That little light bulb, when that goes out, the flag is up. So that's the plan. Now, Frank is asking me to rev the bus up to try to see if we can build the air up. I don't like doing that. I really don't enjoy revving the nuts out of the bus, to be quite honest with you, but sometimes needs must. So anyway, working quite hard to try to get this to raise, and it was great news to actually see the air gauge start moving up beyond where it was the other week. And the surprise for me was that despite the fact it was operating pressure, we still had the flag unit down, but the air tank, as you can just about see here, sorry it's a rather crappy shot, is showing that the flag should have raised at that point. What we didn't notice, and I did mention earlier on, the gearbox runs on a much lower pressure, and I had assumed that the air would have gone to the brakes first, then to the gearbox, then to the auxiliary tank. That's not what it did it? It sent the air to the gearbox, and that caused a bit of a surprise for us because we weren't aware there's Frank moving around inside the bus going, where's all that smoke coming from? Yep, it's coming from the gearbox, and we managed to fill the shed up with acrid smoke, unfortunately. But anyway, I don't think there was any harm done to the bus, luckily. And we did check the flywheel afterwards, and the flywheel, which is a thing that it takes up the torque between the engine and the box, and that was actually quite cool. So yeah, there we are, guys and girls. A little bit of a lesson learned, and unfortunately the postscript to all of that effort was that literally as soon as we'd shut the bus off, the air pressure dropped back to 0. So it's a job for another day, unfortunately. I'll put that one on the back burner. Perhaps that's the wrong word with all that smoke swirling around in the workshop. Right, for me, this was the main event, and the reason that I asked Frank to pop up on Sunday. I needed to set up the tappets. There was a couple when we started it up, I thought a little bit noisy. So before we put the rocker box cover back on, I thought it'd be an opportunity to set the tappets up, and then we can literally say, well, all of that's finished. So anyway, I won't go through all the video, you'll be pleased to know, because it took us forever. but I will show you some of the highlights. Right, let's go then. Right, the first thing Frank wanted me to do was to get the engine to top dead centre. There's a mark on both the flywheel in the saloon and on the top of the fuel pump. Although you need to make sure that the mark on the fuel pump and the mark on the flywheel are in exactly the same place, which is what we're doing here. I'm actually turning the engine using that rather large spanner until we can get it to top dead centre. And once we get it to top dead centre, we can then start to do the tappets. So I personally have not done tappets for probably about 30 odd years, I think, maybe more. The last time I did it was on RM1069, and it's a very slightly different setup to this. Now, there are 12 valves on a 6-cylinder engine. One is an inlet, one is an outlet for the exhaust fumes. So the inlet lets the air in, the outlet gets the exhaust fumes out. And there's a moment where both are closed, and it's what Frank refers to, and I think a lot of engineers do, as the valves are on the rock. Now, what you do is when you're adjusting it, you find one particular cylinder, as it were, and you find those valves on the rock, and working on the power of 7. So in other words, if it's number 2 cylinder that's on the rock, then if you deduct 2 from 7, you end up with 5. So you then adjust number 5, and so on until eventually all of the valves are adjusted. So what Frank's done is we've made a note of the individual cylinders, which is what Frank's sort of pointing at now. He's going through each one. And we made a note, and then we worked through each one, obviously. Now, there is one of them was really badly out, but the rest were really quite okay. So I was quite pleased with what we did. So Frank's just going to make a mark as we work our way through each one. Frank's going to make a mark as to what he finds. But other than that, it was actually quite satisfying, because I really thought it was going to be horrendous, being that the bus has been sort of dead for so long, and that we were going to have, you know, potentially you get broken springs, you can get the little collet things on the top that can come off, and none of that happened at all. It was absolutely perfect. So, as I say, apart from the one that Frank's pointing at now, which had a gap big enough to drive a bus through, other than that, it was a nice little job to get done. So anyway, that's that. I won't dwell on this anymore, because this actually goes on for probably about an hour and a half of me turning the engine and Frank going, "Number 1's on the rock, Dean." So anyway, yeah, adjust number 6, Frank. So anyway, there we are. So that's doing the tappets. Right, now that Frank's finished all of his work on the engine, I think we're fairly confident now to start putting the inner wing arch back. Frank did say that he found it much easier with the wheel off and the wing and everything else off to work on the pump and do all the tappets and everything. RTs are not bad, really. With an RM, you can take the whole of the wing area off. So where I am now, on an RM, that whole lot comes off. And that means that if you take the wheel off, you've got absolutely perfect access to the engine. Unfortunately, this is one part that's won't come off. It's part of the body. But just inside there is an inner wheel arch. It's like a piece of metal. I'll show you that in a second. And what it does is obviously sort of, I don't know, deflects water away from the body of the vehicle. So this one came off. It was really manky and horrible when it was on there previously. So I tidied it all up, resprayed it, and I'm quite happy with that now. But I needed to leave it off because there was a few pipes and things, and there's some fuel pipes that go through there, and a couple of other bits and pieces, like the back of that driver's step well, which I needed access to. So now that we've finished that, it's now time to put the whole thing back together again. Right, so this is what it looked like when that inner wing came off. A kaleidoscope of colours. Yeah, and at the top of shot, you can see that's the rubber mud spat. So I basically, the rest of it, I've rubbed it all down, both sides, resprayed it in a nice black, black gloss paint. And I have used tyre black on the rubber mud spat at the top. So it doesn't look too bad now. I'm quite pleased with that. So what you're seeing now is me reinstalling that frame. that I've used steel screws, so they look really nice when I was doing it because they sort of contrast with the black, but I had to come back later on and paint them out and get rid of them, but sadly, so you can't see them now, but they are there. Right, and then the very final thing, once I'd done that, was to reinstate the plastic mud spat. I think some of them were actually steel, but this one's definitely plastic, and that little piece of beading. Both are the original parts from the bus. Right, so almost finally on this little project. I was going to start putting this rubber band back. You don't see much of this actually, you only see a very small amount of it, and there's two little metal strips that go across the top. They are held in by these coach bolts that you see. There's, I think, 4 or 5 either side. Regretfully, having bought the coach bolts, they were just a little bit too short for those nuts to go on the back. So I've ended up having to order up some more from my friend Tony, who does all the my screws and bits and pieces. The only problem is that I've got to go to a metric coach bolt, which may pose a little bit of a problem. I'll have to look and see what that does with it. But anyway, so hopefully, fingers and toes crossed, the coach bolts will be the right ones now, and we'll be able to continue to put all that back on, and that includes all that little, that rest of that mud spat. And then eventually, who knows, might be able to put the wheel back on. So, and that'll close up that job, but I'm sure there's a few more bits that will come to light in the meantime. Right, so this almost finish up. We've got one more thing to do after this. Is friends that visited. So first of all, big thank you to Frank Strater, who popped in, travelled up on public transport to give me a hand with the RT. So thank you very much, Frank. Also, special visitors this week were Ron Benstead, who restored GS13, I think in his garden in Dagenham. But anyway, yeah, he bought a lovely coach as well, this little little single deck bus or whatever it was, and that was also stored in the shed just over the other side. There's me. I have to get into everything, don't I? And then we've got Richard Butter, who's got a lovely AEC lorry. It's up for sale. If anyone wants to buy an AEC lorry, give me a call and I'll put you in touch with Richard. And it was great to see Paul Hattersley. Paul used to work on the Docklands Light Railway as a service controller or regulator of the trains, whatever you want to call them. And he also had a vehicle in the shed. So it was really lovely to see those 3 friends of mine pop in to say hello, and also for them to look over the work that I've been doing on my RT, and for them to have a look at some of the other projects that were going on. Right, so a final point is, what did we get up to this 3-day weekend? Before I do that, I'm going to throw this in as a little bit of light relief. This duck that you can see in shot keeps turning up every morning at 6 o'clock, and it waddles around outside the barn, and I keep looking out and it's still out there. I don't know what it's doing, but it seems to be hanging around. We're nowhere near a river, we're nowhere near a pond, we're nowhere near a lake or anything else, so no idea what it's doing, but I'm sure when I pop up this weekend it'll be hanging around again. But anyway, maybe someone's feeding it, I don't know. Right, let's get on with this then. So this weekend, thanks to Frank's help, we managed to get the Tappets sorted out. Also, which I didn't film, thankfully, Frank managed to sort out the throttle linkage, because I was told by Dave, who did the work on the pump, you may remember, he said don't connect up the throttle linkage until everything's right. So that was the last thing to do. Unfortunately, I put it back, or part of it back, and Frank struggled for about half an hour or so trying to get the split pin that I put on off. Thank you very much for that, Frank. We also managed to make a mess of the workshop floor by blowing that tank down, but you know, at least it's progress. There's going to be work is going to have to be done on that at some point in the future. Thank you very much for everyone that's chipped in with some ideas independently via personal messenger or whatever we call it on the internet these days. I managed to get part of the inner wing back, but I didn't get all of it back because I ran out of coach bolts. I didn't have the right one. I was hoping to put the conduit back on, But no, there's further work needed to be done on that. But I did manage to get all the stress panels out, and in doing so, a lump of rust in my eye. But those are the joys of owning an RT. So once again, everyone, thank you very much for watching this. Sorry it's gone on too long. It actually was 3 days. When I look back at these things, when I'm there, I think I'm not achieving anything. But when I look back at this, you think, actually, it didn't do too bad, really. So thanks very much for watching. And as usual, as I say, YouTube will recommend some more for you to watch if you've got an insomnia problem.